my name is Lance Holloway and I'm with the Center 4-H Club in Shelby County, Texas. One of my hobbies and a business I've started is taxidermy. Taxidermy is the process of completing a European mount through preparation and cleaning of the skull. This is a process where you remove the skin and the flesh to just come out as a skull, and then you bleach it where it becomes white. This process of European mounting, starting in the early 1700s, came from when Europeans wanted to preserve animals found in North America and bring back to Europe. However, they found that bringing the whole animal back to Europe was too expensive, so someone found out a way to just preserve the skull and take back to Europe, in which they could preserve the animal skull and have a representation of North American animals. Again, there are 4 parts to creating a European mount. First of all, preparing. After that, you'll clean the skull, and then bleaching the skull, and then finally preserving and mounting the skull. So the first thing you're going to need in taxidermy is you're going to need your tools. So the first tool that's pretty important is your Havilon. This is what I use. You can use a scalpel or you can use any regular pocket knife, but I prefer the Havilon because it comes with exchangeable blades, which is really handy for when the blades go dull. You can just change them out and it works really well. And after that, you're going to need your gloves to protect from zoonotic diseases that can be spread, like Lyme's disease, rabies, or anything that deer carry that can be transmitted into humans. And also I like to use needle nose pliers. These come in handy when removing like the small parts of the flesh from behind the skull and removing the brains, and it's just a really helpful tool. And another thing I like to use is this is a hanger, a clothing hanger, and this is also really handy in scrambling the brains, and it makes it easier to get them out. And I just looped it around to make a loop that'll fit inside the brain cavity and makes it real easy to remove the brains. And also another important thing when handling other people's animals is having a wildlife research document. This is to show that the animal was legally harvested and legally transferred into your hands. So now we're going to start with cleaning the skull. So first of all, I'm going to put on my gloves to protect from zoonotic diseases like Lyme's disease and rabies because they can be easily transmitted. So it's just a good safety precaution along with the lab coat. So when starting to remove the skin, it doesn't really matter where you start because in the end you're going to have to remove all of it. But I prefer to start in the back. And I'm just going to make a cut all the way up to the horns and then on down so I can just work my way down. And not particularly on deer, but if you're working on smaller animals, you have to be real careful and not trying to cut too hard because there is some small bone fragments in here that can be broken. So you just want to remove the flesh and the skin, but not push down too hard or scrape too hard. So here I'm going to go ahead and remove the ears. The ears are just a part of the skin. They don't have anything to do with the mount, so I'm just going to go ahead and take them off with the rest of the skin. And right here, I'm just gonna cut out the tongue. It, along with the ears, has nothing to do with the mount, so I can just go ahead and take it out like I would any other piece of flesh. And also, this skull right now is really cold. It's still very frozen, so I would remove the jaw, but I think I'm gonna have to let it boil a little bit before I'm able to get it off. Now, as you can see, I have all of the skin removed. So now I'm just gonna go on to taking as much flesh as I can off of the skull, because this will make it easier when it comes to boiling. It won't take as long and it'll be easier to get off. Another important step in a European mount is to remove the neck. Now, the neck can come in different portions depending on where it was cut off when the animal was killed. I mean, it is good to leave a little bit of neck because you might not know exactly where the skull is compared to the neck bone. However, this is quite a big piece of neck, so I'm going to need to remove this so I can reach the brain cavity to scramble the brains. Right here is it's like the bone or like the neck joint that connects the neck to the skull. It's kind of a tricky part to get off. You just have to figure out how to get into it to break it open. All right, so that's the removal of the neck. So now we're just left with the bone that will be in the skull mount. And this is the brain cavity right there. So the next step will be removing or scrambling the brains. So now we're going to move to the next part, which is the actual cleaning and the removing of all the flesh in the skull. And for this, you're going to need pretty much the same equipment, except you're going to need for the method I use, which is hot water maceration, I use a pot with a heating element in it, and I use laundry detergent. I find this method very effective, and I would say it's probably the fastest out of the other methods, which the other methods are, for one, you can use beetles. The beetles will actually eat all the flesh off of the skull and have it cleaned, pretty much just cleaned for you without you having to do much besides feed the beetles. However, the downfall to that is it takes a really long time. It takes up to weeks on weeks for the beetles to get all of the flesh removed. Another method is the cold water maceration, which would be just soaking the deer head in water with the laundry detergent in it, which this would also take a few days, about 5 days probably, for it to get the flesh to where it's able to be removed. So back to what I was saying about what I do, which is hot water maceration. This pot, I've rigged up a hot water heating element in it right there, just rigged to an extension cord that you can plug into a wall. And you fill this up and you just put your deer head in there. And I like to use Arm & Hammer laundry detergent. I found this to be very effective, and it makes the flesh pretty much fall off the bone, really easy to remove. And I just really like that. So you'd fill up your pot and put your deer head in it and fill it up with some laundry detergent. And for the laundry detergent, I just like to use a whole cup. That's what I found to probably be the most effective amount of laundry detergent that I put in there. So, I mean, you could probably put too much, and you can't put too little, but you can put too much. So I just like to use about a full cup of laundry detergent. So now on to boiling the deer head. So you're just gonna place it into the water, and you're gonna try to have it where as much of the horns stick out of the water as possible while the whole skull is still covered. because fat will build up on the horns from the boiling water, and you'll have to scrub it to get it off, which is not too bad, but it's just not as fun. So next off, I'm gonna pour my cup of laundry detergent. This works as a degreaser, and it'll take the grease out of the deer head, and it'll make the flesh easier to come off. So just pour that in there. And this process of boiling a deer head can take quite a few hours, so you'll need to come back and check on the deer head pretty frequently. And if you were doing a smaller animal skull, like a bobcat, a coyote, any other type of smaller animal, you might need to tie a string onto the bone of the skull, so you can just drop it in there and it'll be easier to pull it out. And also with the smaller head, it would also take less time, so you need to check it frequently and probably remove it in a much shorter period of time than it would take for a deer head. So the whole boiling process takes around 6 hours. That's an approximate, because it does vary with every deer head, and you can boil them too long, and if that happens, your teeth will probably fall out, and if that happens, all you have to do is just, when you drain the pot, just save the teeth, and they can easily be glued back in. It's not that serious, but I mean, if it's seriously overboiled for a few hours too long, then your skull will start to crack, and then you'll have many problems that are not good things. All right, so now that this deer head has been boiling for a little bit, the bottom jaw has gotten a lot softer, and now I'll be able to remove it. This can be done with a little bit of elbow grease, as sometimes it can be rather hard to get off. Yeah. With removing the tongue, it'll be easier to get the bottom jaw off, because it won't have as much muscle and tissue to be in the way of keeping it from coming off. And once you have the bottom jaw removed, the rest of the boiling process tends to go a lot faster, since now the warm water can get inside the nose cavity and just inside like the eye cavity and the brain cavity just a little bit better. And you may be wondering how the eyes come out. With the hot water, the eyes will shrink up with the boiling, and they're just easily popped out through the eye socket. And that's about it when it comes to removing the jaw. You might hear a little bit of like bone cracking, but that's going to be normal because there's a couple small bones in there that will not be on the mount that are connected to the jaw that you might hear snap, and you might think you may have messed up the skull, but in the end, you're probably okay because of the small little bones inside. Scrambling the brains is another part of European mountains that can be tricky to some people. There's a couple different methods that you can use to get the brain cavity out, to get it cleaned out. A method I like is to use the hanger. This works really good in breaking up all of the brain material and making it where it's pretty much like a liquid and it'll just come right out. As long as you have the mass majority out of it, once you stick it back in the boiling pot, most of it will come out on its own. And once you're done with boiling, all you have to do is just get a water hose and just spray it in there. And then it'll pretty much be completely clean because all of the materials are already broken up. And then just spray them out. And that's the technique I use, is to break it up with the hanger and then just clean it out with a water hose. All right, so now that we have all of the flesh removed from this skull, it is now ready for the bleaching process. And the supplies that you're gonna need for the bleaching process are your gloves, your latex gloves, which are gonna be important because you'll be dealing with chemicals. And also, since you're dealing with chemicals, you're gonna need glasses to protect your eyes, and also an apron to protect your clothing and your skin. And then now on for the bleaching materials. First of all, you got your hydrogen peroxide mix. It's a 40 volume, pretty much a hydrogen peroxide mix that is used for bleaching hair and can be purchased at any salons. And then also you're gonna have your powder, your bleaching powder. You will mix those two together to form a paste that will be applied to the skull. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and mix up our bleach. So I'm gonna start with, and first of all, this bottle, it is a quart bottle, and it'll do a lot of heads. It's done 10, and it's still got quite a bit left in it. And this bottle is $5 at Sally's Beauty Supplies, where I get mine. And this right here, this one's a little more expensive. It's about $25, but again, you're gonna be able to do quite a few heads with just one canister of it. So when I mix it, I do this scoop that comes inside of the canister. I'll do 2 scoops of it. And then I'll mix it equally with 2 scoops of your hydrogen peroxide solution. So now that I have this poured in the canister, I'll mix it up. And what I like to do is I like to have quite a thick paste because it'll stay on the skull and it won't drain off. And so for today, for some reason, it's still pretty liquidy. It's not very pasty. So with that, I'm gonna add a little more powder to make it a little more pasty so it will stay on the skull a little better. So I'll do half a scoop. See how that looks. All right, that's a lot better. Now I have a thick paste, and it'll be easier to apply it onto the skull. And if you can see here, I've wrapped the horns because it is not good to get bleach on the horns because you want to keep the horns a natural color and you don't want them to have white spots on them. And it'll look better with wrapping the horns. You don't accidentally get some bleach on the horns. So now I'm gonna begin applying this paste onto the skull. And it's good to be sure to get inside all of the cracks and the crevices, because you're gonna want the whole thing white. You're not gonna have dark spots in it. As you can see, this bleach mixture is still quite a bit liquidy. As you can see, it's dripping on the table. So I think I'm just gonna go ahead and add a little more powder to it so it'll stay on just a little bit better. Okay, yeah, that's a lot better. That's how it's supposed to go on, as a paste, and not much as a liquid. Once you have all of the bleach on it and you let it sit out in the sun or under a heat lamp, any type of light really helps the bleach dry out, and you'll know it's done when the bleach is all dry and it's flaky. It's pretty much like a dust that you can just brush off. And sometimes on the first bleaching, the deer head might not be as white as you like. And if you would like it whiter, all you have to do is just repeat the same process of bleaching it again until you get it to the desirable white color that you like it. And some people just don't like to bleach it at all and like to keep the natural color of the skull, which is fine. When it's completely dry, I prefer to use a Dremel to just get the dust off, and I think that helps it get a little whiter. You could probably wash it off or blow it off with an air compressor. That also works. Now that I've got all the bleach on it and I've got it in all of the spots that are visible on the mount, I'm now gonna let it sit outside and soak up some sunshine and help it get white. I like to leave it in the sun at least for a few hours, 4 hours or so. You can leave it in longer as long as you don't leave it overnight where it would get dew on it, and that wouldn't be good. But yeah, the sunshine really just acts as a whitening. It just helps it become white. And besides bleaching the skulls, there's a couple other methods to use to get the skull white, or to preserve the skull. The first one is the polyurethane method, and this is where you would spray on clear coats of this polyurethane, and you would spray one on, let it dry, and then spray another coat, and let it dry, and then spray another coat. And this would just put a glossy finish on the deer head and preserve it naturally. Another method of preserving the deer skull would be with the white glue method. And this is where you would mix equal parts of white glue and water, and you would apply that onto the deer skull, and it would apply a good glossy finish to the deer skull. And these two methods are good methods to use if you were working with kids or young children, so you would not have to be using chemicals around them, and it'd just be a safer method to use. And finally, for the last step of the European mountain, this is an optional step, but it's a step that I tend to like, and that's the mounting the skull. And this is where you would just put the skull and you would put it on a plaque, and these plaques right here can be purchased from any taxidermy supplier. The one I use is Mackenzie's taxidermy. And you just have to put these plaques together and just screw the skull onto it. It's a couple steps in it, and it's not too hard to do, but it can get a little tricky sometimes. Another simple method of mounting a deer skull is with one of these little clips. These can also be purchased at any taxidermist supplier. And all you have to do with these little clips is just screw it onto a piece of wood. It could be a plaque like this one, it could be barn wood. You could probably screw it into a wall if you would like to, in like a cabin or something. And this one's really simple. All you have to do is grab the deer skull, and it has the little brain cavity right there, and you just slide the brain cavity hole right there on that top part, and it sits on there just like that. And that's a real simple, cheap mount.
I hope you have enjoyed learning to make a European mount in the 4-H Natural Resources Wildlife Program today. If you have any questions, be sure and visit us at texas4h.tamu.edu for more information on our taxidermy project.